Well, we've come to the end of our time together, or almost the end. And so we want to have a moment to discuss together from Scripture how we're to understand that part of ourself that we would call the moral self, or as I'm calling it, character. We've talked about the heart, we've talked about the physical body, we've talked about our story, we've talked about all these different components of who we are. We still haven't talked about our relationships, we haven't talked about God himself as it relates to who we are. But before we get to those two themes, we want to stop and talk about the moral self, our character or virtue. I'll use those interchangeably. And I'm going to break it down into 4 parts. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the need of our social moment, the need for character formation. I'm going to talk about, secondly, the resources from which we can draw for this thing I'm calling character formation. And then we're going to talk about the kind of people Christians should be. What kind of people should we be as Christians? And then finally, we'll talk about the kind of formation that we should attend to for the good of all. So those are the 4 kind of parts, and I'll go through them very quickly. Here's the first one, the need of our social moment. If you have no particular angst about the needs of our current social moment, then either you're not paying attention or you don't have children. That was kind of supposed to be funny, but anyway, nobody got it. Because if you have children, you are very intuitive of the fact that there is a problem with humanity. And that, by the way, the children are a reflection of their parents and grandparents, so it should be like a mirror where you go, oh, I got problems too. That's how it's supposed to work, just so you know. That's why parents should be constantly in a humble place. Because we see like little mirrors, the reflected problems in our children and grandchildren. It's not like, oh, they're so messed up. No, it's like, oh my, they probably saw that in me. Ooh, I mean, that's just that's that irony, the tension that we live with. We love our kids, but we also see their own brokenness because we have lived with them. And so I think every parent and grandparent that is at least moderately alert has a real sense of concern as to the kind of people the next generation are becoming. Would you agree with that? Okay. And this especially applies to their own children and grandchildren. But I would say there's kind of an ironic concern with the younger generation looking to the older generation as they look and say, I'm kind of disturbed about the kind of people you are. That's actually happening in our culture. And you kind of have to see it from both sides. And to be honest, I have the privilege of being kind of, I feel like I'm kind of right in the middle of that, and I kind of see both sides. So on the positive side, from a cultural moment perspective, there is a sense in which it feels like over the past 10 years, there has been at least a kind of sub-movement of people waking up to this reality, that they have begun to have their own angst, restlessness in their heart about the way things are going from a more pop cultural vibe, where there's like large groups of younger people and older people going, something isn't right here. The way that we're presenting what a good human is supposed to look like doesn't seem to be right. It doesn't sit right in my own heart. And so there's been a movement over the past 10 years of especially the younger generation really searching for some handles to hold on to give them some sense of solidity about what life is supposed to look like so that you can say, I'm actually living a good life. And I'm not going to go into the movements and the talking heads and the podcasts and the books and the all the stuff that's been happening over the past 10 years. Thousands and thousands and even millions of people have been moving in this realm. But what I'm just going to say is there's been an understanding that there's a need to embrace personal responsibility And it's been a younger generation that's even kind of pushing for this, which is interesting. Instead of having a kind of a victim mentality, that there's a need to embrace your own personal responsibility. This has been something for 10 years that's been kind of moving in our culture. It's been interesting. And then a need for self-discipline. This is why self-help books are like millions. It's because there's a sense that I need to discipline myself for the results I want. And so there's a movement where, there's seminars where thousands and thousands of people come to get more information about how they can discipline themselves in this good way. Just living with unrestrained desires or nonstop entertainment or unhealthy eating or no exercise routine, all this people aren't content with, especially the younger generation. And they're saying we need to figure out ways to discipline ourselves. I see this as positive. I think this is a good thing. There's also been a sense that there's a need for character formation. It's not just like the inner me is like magical and I am amazing just because, I'm amazing. Like that only gets you so far. And I think even the younger generation is starting to see through that. Even though they grew up on Disney movies that were saying that constantly, and I'm not busting on Disney. I like, Disney. I'm just saying that cultural pop idea that everything is beautiful about you and it's inside of you and all you have to do is let the world see it and you can do anything or conquer anything or go anywhere. Even the younger generation is starting to see the shallowness of that. And so they're saying, we need a way to form ourselves into something more, like our inner selves. And so there's been a movement over the past 10 years where this has been happening. And then finally, this need for objective meaning. People have, especially the younger generation, have been seeing that life is difficult and messy and very often hurtful. And so these questions of why am I even doing all this? What's the point of this? Have weighed heavily on people. So that philosophical ideas like Stoicism have been becoming more popular in the last 10 years and books are being written and because people are grasping for meaning. Now, I see all this as a good sign. I'm excited about this. But I think that it's worth us just noticing that there is this cultural thing happening. And I'm also excited about that question of meaning. I'm excited that younger people are actually asking, what is the point of this? And not just asking it, but digging to find out the answers to that question. Because as we talked about in a sermon or two ago, that question actually taps in to the great conversation that has been going on since the beginning of time. And one of the questions in the great conversation that all the great minds of our past have asked is, what is the meaning of life? Or is there any meaning at all? And so I think, great minds like Plato and Aristotle, this is where they began. They began with the question of what they would call the chief end or the ultimate end of all things. We're doing all this stuff, but is there an ultimate meaning in it or an ultimate reason for it? And so they would write books, and they would start here. And even great theological minds in American history started right here at this question, what is the chief end of man? What are we doing here, ultimately? So anything that you do, any action you take, has an end in mind, unless it's for its own sake. So, for example, when I drink coffee, two things happen. When I drink coffee, I enjoy the coffee for its own sake, because it's exhilarating and delightful. And so I drink the coffee and I go Why are you drinking that, Stephen? Because it's coffee. Need you say more? Need I say more? But also, I have another end in mind, that the coffee kind of makes me feel alive so I can get going for the day. So you could say that I'm drinking my coffee with a different end in mind, or you could say I'm drinking my coffee just for its own sake. So that question, with an end in mind or just for its own sake, has to be asked about everything that we do. And so if you're a philosopher or a deep thinker, or you want to be a part of the great conversation, this is where you have to start. What is the ultimate reason that we do anything? Now, different, philosophers and different thinkers have come up with different answers. But I want to say to you that there is a pretty common answer for those of us who are followers of Jesus, which is, I assume, why you're here on a Sunday morning. Because you're like, I want to follow Jesus with you guys, at least for this morning. So if that's you, then here's your answer to this question. What is the chief end, the ultimate end of everything we're doing? You know what it is? The glory of God. For the church, that has been our answer. That's been the primary answer, that we're doing what we're doing for the glory of God. Now, that's a whole sermon in and of itself, or a whole 5 sermons in and of itself. What does it mean to live and do things for the glory of God? Because that kind of sounds selfish on God's part, doesn't it? Why does he want glory? Well, here's what I'll say. If I were to say to you, the reason that we do all that we do is for the glory of Stephen, what would you guys say about that? Boo, I hope. I hope you'd throw something at me, and rightfully so. You'd have to be the most arrogant person on the planet to say that everything that's happening is for my good and my glory. That's a tyrant. That's a crazy person. There is no person who deserves that kind of worship because every person on the planet is broken. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you think you are. You are broken right down the middle of your heart, just like everybody else. But there's one person who is whole in and of himself. There is one person who is glorious in and of himself, who has love and joy to give like rivers to all people, to turn deserts into blossoming gardens. There's only one person who has this innate power and glory. Anybody want to take a stab at who this is? It's Jesus. It's God himself. So God himself is the only one who can say, everything here should be for my glory, because his glory isn't a stopping point. He doesn't just suck it all in and keep it all to himself. It comes in and it flows out to all of us, and we drown in the waters of his glory. And I mean drown in a good way. So for a Christian, that's our beginning point. So if that is true, then we need to live lives that meet the glory of God, that work with the glory of God in this world, so that God's glory comes to us and we kind of, like a loop, funnel it back to him as we move out in creation and love creation and love people and love our neighbors and love our families and love our husbands and love our wives and love our grandchildren. And as we move out, it brings more glory to God, like this beautiful loop. That was kind of the whole intention from Genesis chapter 1. But if you're like me, I need a little more handles. How do I become this kind of person, right? Well, throughout history, there's been a conversation about this, and so wise thinkers have come up with ways of talking about this. And so they've talked about this in the sense of virtues. There's some virtues that we need to cultivate to actually be good humans. And so the great thinkers have identified 4 that they call the cardinal virtues. Anybody heard this phrase? Okay, the cardinal virtues, it has nothing to do with like Catholic cardinals. That's not what, or the bird cardinals, or the baseball team. None of that. Cardinal is a Latin word that has the idea of pivot. These are pivotal, there it is, pivotal virtues, because all the other virtues pivot on these 4 things. So here they are. This is what we need to cultivate to be good humans, according to the great thinkers and according to the scriptures. A lot of these you'll find right in the virtue lists, which there's multiple of them in the scriptures. You'll find these words in those lists. Here they are. Maybe you know them. Anybody know these? If you don't, you're going to know them after the sermon, okay? So the first one is wisdom or prudence. The classical way of use is usually the word prudence. I like the word wisdom a little bit better because it's about a common sense way of living. It's about intelligence and living normal life. We need a lot of wisdom to navigate this life, don't we? Yes, I need it every single day. And so we have to cultivate this virtue of wisdom. That's the first one. The second one is self-control. The classic word was temperance. I don't like that word as much because that just makes people think of not drinking, and that's not the point. The point is just self-restraint. Like in anything that we do, we always need to be self-controlled. There's times we need to hold ourselves back and moderate our desires. It's a healthy human thing to not just go all out on your desires all the time, right? Oftentimes, you need to hold back on your desires. You need to restrain yourself. Why? For the good of others. So self-control. Then the third one is courage, or the classic word would be fortitude, which I do like that word too. And this has to do with perseverance during hardship, but also courage to step out and do the right thing, or the good thing, or the thing that will show love to others, to have the courage, the inner fortitude to do what needs to be done. Courage. And then the last one is justice. Moving out and cultivating the virtue of dealing fairly with other people. Justice. And so these four pivotal virtues have been seen for many, many, many years to be the essential, here's what, if you want to be a good human, you should cultivate to be a good human. Wisdom, self-control, courage, and justice. This is what character formation, this is like the resources, the ancient resources that we can draw from for this character formation. Now there's an overlap because the Christian virtues, so there's three of them that have been recognized, they're called the theological virtues. They kind of overlap with these general human virtues. Every human on the planet needs to be self-controlled, courageous, right? Nobody gets a pass on this one. Every human needs to be wise. It helps them flourish as a human. It helps them in their relationships. But there's three virtues that kind of overlap with these that are specifically for those who are following Jesus, because they're highlighted in the scripture often. And those three virtues, those three theological virtues, or you can just call them Christian virtues if you want, are faith, hope, and love. Does that sound familiar? You probably have it crocheted on some pillow in your house. And I'm not busting on that. Enjoy your crocheted pillow. But this is a big deal. Like these three virtues are specifically for those who are following Jesus, because a Christian needs to have faith. They need to have a posture of trust in God as a way of life. And they need to cultivate that virtue in their life. That faith. Faithfulness, or hope. A Christian has a heart posture that anticipates the future restoration of all things in Jesus. But we have to cultivate that reality, that truth. And then a Christian has a heart posture of sacrificing for the good of others, love. But it's not just natural. We have to cultivate that. Because the Spirit's in us going, you need to be more loving, you need to be more faithful, you need to be more hopeful, hope in God, what He's going to do in the future. And He's cultivating that, but we have to work with the Spirit to form our character, to be courageous, self-controlled, wise. These pivotal virtues, and faithfulness, hope, and love, and cultivating these Christian virtues. Now, if you're going to ask the kind of people Christians should be, we are the kind of people who are serious about love, moving out with these virtuous character formation kind of vibe toward others. And this isn't something like massive. This happens in the nitty-gritty of our everyday life. That's how character works. David Brooks said it this way: I've come to believe that the quality of our lives and the health of our society depends to a large part on how well we treat each other in the minute interactions of daily life. I think he's right. I think how we treat each other in the minute interactions of our daily life is the testimony to our character. It's not how you are here when you come in on Sunday. Hello, Pastor. Hope you had a great week, because I sure did. Okay, yeah, I'm okay with that. But the reality is, your week could have been horrible because you were yelling at your kids, you were honking the horn, flipping people off who were, cutting in front of you. You're saying, oh, we wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, you would. Don't even. I know, because I see, it makes me laugh every time. I see how people change their vibe when they're with me, and I love it. Because I don't believe it at all. I've been a pastor for 20 years, and I have seen it, and it cracks me up every time. That's why I don't tell anybody what I am. When I'm like playing basketball in the community or something, I don't tell them who I am. I try very intensely never to, because I don't want to see their fake self. I want to see their real self. As soon as they say I'm a pastor, like, well, praise the Lord for that. You know, this is a dude who's been dropping F-bombs every other, and now it's like, I was praying the other day, and I'm like, I don't want that version of you. Because here's the deal, God doesn't want that version of you. He wants the real us, but he wants that real us to be formed. That's the problem. That's the point. To form our character. And we should be growing and becoming better people the more we walk with Jesus. And so as Christians, we're serious about that. We're also serious about how we relate to others and how we attend to ourselves. So the great C.S. Lewis, he talked about this. He talked about this moral self being really important. He said it's like a fleet of ships. You're a ship. And what you want to do is the moral you don't want to crash into other people. That's a problem. He said we do that when, in our normal life, when we're bullying or cheating other people or harming other people. It's like a ship, crashing into the other ship. That's not good moral self way of being. But he also said it's important that you keep your own ship in order. If everything in your own ship is in, disarray and things are, interfering with other things, then the ship ultimately isn't going to run well either. So you've got two things about your moral self. You've got to make sure you don't crash into other people, and you got to make sure you care for your own ship well, and that's what character formation is. It's taking that seriously. So people who begin this character formation journey have to start someplace, and I want to encourage you to start from one particular text. 2 Peter 1, 5 through 11. So just put that down because we only have 5 minutes and I'm closing out. So I'm not going to have time to walk through that text. But 2 Peter 1, 5 through 11 will allow you to see how you start. So I am going to read it. I'm not going to preach through it, but I'm just going to read it to you so you can at least get the sense. And I would even encourage you to start with verse 3. And what's going to happen is Peter's going to give us his virtue list, but he's going to set us up by saying, here's how you start this virtue as a Christian. You rest in the divine power that God has given you for this work. So here's how he says it. His divine power has given us everything needed for life and godliness. Let me say that one more time, because I don't think you heard it the first time, because if you would have heard it correctly and believed it, I probably would have heard but I didn't, so I'm going to read it again. His divine power has given us everything needed for life and godliness. Whoa! I don't know how you respond to something amazing. Do you understand what that says? You already have the resources, every resource you need from the very power of God himself, everything you need for life and godliness. Let me think what I need for life and godliness. It's a lot. And Peter's like, it's okay though, because God in his power is a resource that's available for everything you need. And then it says, through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness, thus he has given us, through these things, the precious and very great promises, so that through them you may escape from the corruption that is in the world because of lust, and may become participants in the divine nature. There's another one that should have got the, He just said that he set it up so that you and little me can participate in the divine nature. That is, we get to engage in the loving relationship of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit that they've had from all eternity, this great dance, and I say that intentionally for those of you in the book club. this great dance from all eternity, we get to be drawn into that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. So you would think, good, let's close out the service and go home because that's all we need, right? And I'm saying, yes, that is, amen, but Peter goes on and says, because of this, for this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith, and then he goes into his virtue list, goodness. And to goodness, what's the next one? Knowledge. And to knowledge, what's the next one? Self-control. There's our word again. So he gives his list of 7 virtues that you have to add to your faithfulness to God. He said, I've given you all the resources you need, but here's your part. You need to form your character. You need to intentionally make every effort to add to your faithfulness to God, your faith, these character formation, these virtues. Now, I could go, and I don't have time, so I'm not going to, but I could go down and explain each word here as Peter used it in the Greek, which is a cool thing for another day. But what I want to do is just simply close by saying this. I want to invite you to join me this week in your homework. Remember, this sermon, I don't usually give homework, but in this sermon series we have homework because it's whole body formation here that we're doing. And so this week, I want to invite you for the next 7 days, starting Monday and then ending on Sunday. For next 7 days, to add to your faith 7 virtues. 1 a day. It's like your 1-a-day vitamins, which I don't take, and I'm supposed to. So I'm going to do this, and then hopefully that'll help me with my vitamin problem. I want to encourage you to add to your faith, your love of Jesus, the 3 theological virtues, which are faith, hope, and love, on the pillow, right? Okay. And then the 4 pivotal virtues or cardinal virtues, which are just good for every human. So this is how it'll work. You wake up on Monday morning, and you're okay, I'm going to add the first of the theological virtues. I'm going to add today to my desire to pursue Jesus, I'm going to add faith. How can I cultivate faith in my life today? How can I make that a part of who I am? I'm going to read about faith. I'm going to talk to friends about faith. I'm going to pray about my own faithfulness to God and how I can cultivate that in a way. And only focus on one. Don't focus on all 7 or the other 5 to 6 lists in the scriptures. There's a bunch of them. Don't go off and read Aristotle too much unless you just, want to. You can borrow mine, but I wouldn't recommend it. Just baby steps. Just work on 1 at a time. That's, I think, part of the reason why Peter does it the way he does it. He says, add to your faith this, because he wants us to focus on 1 at a time. So then on Tuesday, you wake up, and you're going to say, I'm going to add to this faith. What's the next one? Hope. I'm going to cultivate hope in the coming of Jesus, what it means when he's going to restore all things, when he's going to wipe every tear from our eyes. I'm going to cultivate, what does that look like to live in that hope now? And then you're going to wake up on Wednesday and you're going to cultivate, what is it? Love. You can cultivate love. How can I love others well? How can I move out to care for others well? How can I love God with all my heart, soul, and strength and love my neighbor as myself? What would that look like if I did that today in my workplace, in my family life, in my neighborhood? What would that look like? And then you're going to wake up the next day and you're going to add wisdom or prudence. Self-control the next day, justice the next day, courage, justice. And so that each day, for 7 days, you're focusing on specific character formation, and we get to do it together. So that's your homework. This is not a mandatory thing. Anybody can participate that wants to. But here's the deal. If you don't intentionally form your character, you will get to the end of your life and realize your character has already been formed, and it may not be a pretty thing. That's the reality. And so instead of waiting, whatever stage of life you're in, and whatever part of the character formation you've been on, which you have whether you know it or not, but what about for the final years of your life, forming your character to be the most Jesus-like human in Pittsfield? Wouldn't that be awesome? Why? for the glory of God and the good of others. That's why. That is the Christian posture. And so I want to encourage you to do it with me, because I need it, and to help us do this together. 747. 7 virtues for 7 days. Would you pray with me?